This reading is from Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 to 7, which can be found on page 694 in the church Bibles. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. This is the word of the Lord.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's great to see you all, and we've got a wonderful reading to think about together, haven't we? Now, just to help us think, where are we? Because some of us are coming into this service, and we've been learning other things over in our groups in recent weeks. So in here, we've been going through the first 3 chapters of Isaiah, and we've been thinking all about the people and how they were treating God. And in the last week, we heard that all the people were ignoring God. They weren't listening to God. King Ahaz and the people, they didn't listen to God. And the big question was, are you going to trust me or not? Are you going to listen or are you going to ignore me? And you know, a really sad thing happened. Most of the people ignored God. And there was a big problem. They were in darkness. And there's a big problem when we try and ignore God and live life our own way. It's like living in the darkness. But Jesus came to fix that problem. He came as a big light, a great light in a dark world to fix our problem. Verse 6 says, for us a child is born, to us a son is given. Jesus is the great light who stepped down into the darkness of this world and died on the cross to take the darkness of God's judgment instead of us. And you know, an amazing thing happens when a person says sorry to God for ignoring him and starts living in the light. It's like God opens their eyes and they can see clearly, like those blindfolds that were taken off. Do you know, it's really encouraging. I spoke to a lady this week from our church family who was telling me about when she first put her faith in Jesus. And here's what she said to me. She said it felt like the light had been switched on for the first time in her life, and she could see clearly. That's what happens when we put our trust in Jesus. Our eyes are open and we can see him for who he really is and why he's worth following. We see that in verses 6 and 7, if you've still got it open. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. We've got those things on the screen, and we're going to think about them together because each of these descriptions of Jesus is a wonderful thing for us to remember. See, first, Jesus is Wonderful Counselor, which means that he knows best, what's best for us. Remember when things go wrong, when we listen to people around us, or we think that the government will fix everything, or even when we think we know what's best. But Jesus isn't like any of that. Jesus' wisdom is perfect. He's never going to tell us anything wrong. He knows what's best for us. That's because he's the Wonderful Counselor. Second, he's the Mighty God, which means that he's powerful enough to save us from that deep darkness that we were in. Remember, when we ignore God, it's like living in darkness and we can't save ourselves. But if you go home and read it, you'll see verses 3-5. What they're saying is that God did what we couldn't. He rescued us like Midian. It was a rescue that God did that we could never do. He rescued us from darkness. God, Jesus is mighty God. Third, he's the everlasting Father. That means that his love for his people will never run out. There's no one else in our lives that we can say that about, is there? However wonderful our family, our friends might be, no one loves us perfectly. No one loves us forever except for Jesus. Wonderful Counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. We know, don't we, especially at the moment, no human government is perfect. All governments fail in many ways, but none of them last forever, do they? But do you see what verse 7 says? Of the increase of Jesus' government and peace, there will be no end. And the zeal of the Lord Almighty will do this. God has promised that when Jesus comes back, he's going to make a perfect new kingdom that will last forever and can never fail. I wonder, when you hear those descriptions, let's have them back up on the screen. When you hear those descriptions of Jesus, do they fill you with joy? When you hear those things, that Jesus is the wonderful counselor who knows what's best for you, do you want to live his way? Are you so relieved that he's the mighty God who can rescue you from darkness? Are you amazed that his love for his people will never run out? As the Prince of Peace, he's going to bring a perfect eternal kingdom. If the answer to those questions is no, deep down, when you're honest, when you hear those things about Jesus, they don't amaze you, then it might be that you're still living in the darkness. You will need to ask God to open your eyes so that you can see Jesus for who he really is. That's the most important thing you could ever do, but it's also a really simple thing to do. It means saying something like this: God, I'm sorry for ignoring you in my life and living in the darkness. Thank you for sending Jesus to be the light in the darkness and to die for me. You can ask God to open your eyes. Or if, when we were looking at those descriptions, if they did fill you with joy, then you and I need to ask God to keep us reminding us of those things, because we so easily forget, don't we? We easily forget that Jesus knows what's best for us. We listen to other people or ourselves instead. We easily forget how amazing it is that Jesus has rescued us from darkness through his death on the cross. We forget that when sad things happen in our life, his love for us will never run out. He's promised that he will bring a perfect eternal kingdom. And you know, because we easily forget those things, here would be a brilliant thing to do together at home after the service, maybe over Sunday lunch. Why not learn verse 6 off by heart? It's an easy one to learn, that Jesus is the wonderful counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. If you learn those things, and you can remember them this week, and when you start to forget those things, you can remember those descriptions of Jesus. So why not learn that this week? And because we easily forget, we're going to have a look at this question together. So you've got a question on the screen. I'll move this out of the way slightly. It says, which descriptions of Jesus do you most easily forget, and what will help you to remember it this week? So if you're here together as a family, in a moment you can turn together as a family and think about that question, or maybe just with those around you. If you'd rather not, that's fine. Just think about that question for yourself. But why not take the opportunity, if you can, to turn to someone near you? We'll think about that question together for a couple of minutes, and then Tom will come to continue leading us in our service.